everyone. My name is David McLeod, and I am your life mastery coach and author of the delightful little book, A Life to Die For. I'm also one of the co-authors in the best-selling series, The Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care. And I'm also a senior partner at the Wellness Universe. So I'd like to welcome you to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. And today we are going to be doing episode number 241. And the topic today is action-based addiction recovery. Now, I have to admit, I have not done an episode on the subject of addiction since I started doing this Life Mastery program. So I'm really excited to get into that conversation today because, you know, addiction is a complex and pervasive condition that is characterized by compulsive and harmful pursuit of a substance or behavior that is believed to produce a sense of euphoria, while inevitably leading to adverse consequences. You know, we've all heard of alcohol and drug addiction, but it's possible to become addicted to almost anything, including things like gambling, eating, sex, and even video games, and even the internet itself. The negative side of addiction impacts not only physical, emotional, and mental health, but also relationships, work, and overall well-being. Well, recovering from any form of addiction is a challenging undertaking for anybody. And regardless of the specific nature of the addiction, the recovery process requires a combination of self-awareness, resilience, and external support. One of the fundamental aspects of addiction recovery is acknowledging the problem and embracing a personal commitment to change. And this self-awareness serves as a catalyst for the transformative journey ahead. So, you know, if you have an addiction problem, if you have a substance abuse problems or something, then you're probably going to have to confront the root causes of your addiction and begin to understand the impact on your lives. So for this episode of my program, I've decided to welcome a licensed chemical dependency counselor to help us understand the nature of both addiction and recovery. My guest, Alan Simberg, who's got a PhD and an LMFT and an LCDC, he has over 50 years of experience as a therapist and counselor and has written his own book entitled Back to Living: Action Strategies to Recover from Your Addiction. So Alan's going to be sharing from his own deep personal background as we delve into this difficult and fascinating topic. So please welcome Alan Simberg to the program. Well, hi there, Alan, and good to see you. Welcome to Life Mastery TV. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you on the program.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me as your guest.
Oh, well, you're most welcome. I mentioned that you've got 50 years of experience, and I assume we're not even just talking about your own personal life experience here. So I guess what I'd like to do, and what I do with most of my guests, is I invite people to talk a little bit about their personal journey. We all have stuff that's happened in our lives. Almost all of us have something that happened that leads us into the path that we're on right now. So I'm kind of curious about your background. Can you tell us a little bit about, maybe a little bit about your early childhood or your whatever area you'd like to share that got you into being a social worker, a life mastery, a licensed family therapist, and your chemical dependency counselor. Can you talk a little bit about your journey? How did you get there? What was your personal reason for wanting to move in that direction?
Yes. Well, actually, my awareness of what I wanted to do started when I was about 7 or 8 years of age. I was
Wow.
sitting, yeah, I was sitting on a piano bench in my family home, and I heard my parents talking, and my father was telling my mother that one of our relatives was coming over. And my mother said, "Well, what's the reason that relative's coming over?" And he said, "She has a problem. I want to see if I can help her." The moment I heard him say that, I thought to myself, that's what I want to do. I want to help people who have a problem.
Hmm.
As I was at that age, 7, 8, maybe a little bit older also as time went on, um, I was watching a television show of a therapist, which I'm sure was scripted, but I didn't know that at the time. And the therapist would be talking to someone, and the person would be talking about things that bother them, and the therapist would ask questions. And I thought to myself, I wonder how that therapist knows what questions to ask. I hope I can be able to do that someday.
Hmm.
And then as time went on, and went on to high school and college and graduate school, I had meetings with different situations, whether it was going to certain jobs, somehow leaving a job, going to another job. So one quick example of that is I had a job at one point that I no longer wanted to be in, and I was applying for other jobs. And I told a friend of mine about that, and he applied for the same job and got the job. So I applied for the job that he left and got it.
Hmm.
At that point in my life, my thought was to become a high school guidance counselor.
Hmm.
So the person that was clinical director of the program where I actually got that job left very soon after I got the job. The person who took over, I did not get along with that person at all.
Hmm.
I found out about an opening in a vocational high school for a counselor. So I applied for that job and got that. So that's just examples of how, in a certain sense, I was led. Now, the way I eventually chose to become a substance abuse counselor is that while I was working in a particular job, I saw a part-time position advertised for a substance abuse counselor in the family program, which was an outpatient program for an inpatient treatment facility. And I thought to myself, I've never done anything like that before. Some of my friends are licensed chemical dependency counselors. I wonder if I'd be interested in that. So I applied for the job, I got it. And within the first couple of meetings with families, it just resonated with me so. And I just knew that that was something that I wanted to pursue.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, um, so to have a calling when you're only 7 years old, that's a pretty impressive thing. I mean, speaking for myself, I had parents who both drank a lot. My mother, I would say, technically speaking, she was an alcoholic. Uh, she accused my father of being an alcoholic, but he seemed to be able to get himself off alcohol without any difficulty. So I had some difficulty believing that he was an alcoholic. But I myself, as a child of people who drank and a child of the military, I was exposed to a lot of stuff. I ended up being a smoker and a drinker from a very early age. And it wasn't until I was in my I'd say early 50s that I quit smoking when I was in 1985. I quit smoking in 85. I quit drinking, however, not until 2001. And I only did that because I was working with a therapist at the time who said to me, I mean, he didn't accuse me of being an alcoholic or even suggest that that was what the problem was. What he did was, I'm really noticing I'm having a hard time getting connected to your feelings, getting you connected to your feelings. And I think it would be helpful if we could get there. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to maybe stop doing any alcohol for the next few weeks until we get this done. And I said, sure, no problem. Well, as soon as I made that commitment to stop drinking, I discovered just how much I was, I won't say addicted, but I craved alcohol for 6 weeks after that. Uh, and I think I had to come to the realization for myself, geez, maybe I am an alcoholic. Maybe this is true that I am addicted to this substance and I haven't even allowed myself to even think about that, and I've been drinking since what, I was 20 years old, 18 years old, something like that. So how much alcohol have I put into my system? How much have I trained my body to accept it and want it without even consciously being aware of that? So for me, shortly, as I said, because of that therapist, I stopped drinking voluntarily and then realized I can't go back to that, because if I do, I'm going to have this craving all the time. So I've never gone through a formal program to get off alcohol, but I had my own difficult journey with it. And that's what I'm talking about. I think, so I was kind of surprised when I asked you what your journey was. Did you have any kind of an issue with chemical dependency of your own at any time in your life?
No,
No? Well, you've been
no.
very blessed then. That's
Yeah.
pretty awesome. To be able to get into a place like that where you're helping people and supporting them in their journey without having had, at least in this lifetime, having had that experience yourself. I think that's pretty amazing.
And I agree. Maybe it was another lifetime.
Well, I don't know about that. Some people talk about having multiple lives. They talk about reincarnation, all that kind of stuff. I don't disbelieve it, but I'm not 100% convinced myself. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about chemical dependency then. What exactly is addiction? And I mean, I know that we have a big problem with addiction in this country and maybe all over the world. But what exactly is it, and how does it come into being?
Well, addiction basically is defined as engaging in a behavior, for example, using substances or engaging in any particular type of behavior, as you had mentioned earlier, gambling, shopping, that has an adverse effect on your life. Another part of that is it's very difficult to stop, or it certainly can be very difficult to stop. And most often, the person doesn't realize that that's the source of any challenges they have in their life. They tend to blame circumstances and other people.
Right.
So addiction
Right.
is
And well, I mean, I think that's normal for most humans who haven't done any personal growth work. To me, that is just an expression of the ego mind. The ego mind likes to externalize all cause and effect and say that caused me to do this.
yes.
It's victimization. Self-victimization is what
Mhm.
it is. Where we uh, many times unconsciously blame all the external circumstances, don't want to take responsibility for our own choices, and that's kind of what life is like. So addiction is not really uh, I mean, you don't have to become addicted in order to have that experience, is what I'm saying. You have to, but when you are addicted, you may still use that kind of thinking to blame something else and so forth. Like the tobacco companies are at fault, or the alcohol producers are at fault, or the drug producers. Well, they are on some level at fault, but only because they know the nature of addiction and they take advantage of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And there's also a physiological aspect to addiction. When we're talking about substances, and particularly alcohol, there's a blood sugar connection, because when we ingest alcohol, it turns to sugar in our system, and that can create spikes in our blood sugar, which can contribute to the cravings and the urges. And then
Right.
also, when people do drink or engage in certain behaviors, their neurotransmitters can be affected, particularly dopamine, which also contributes to the perpetuation of that particular behavior.
Of course. Yeah. Well, that's what I was saying before. I think when I did my intro, the substance, whatever it is, the substance or the behavior gives you that temporary rush of dopamine that gives you the false sense of enjoyment, and therefore you attach that enjoyment to whatever it is you're drinking, whatever it is you're consuming, whatever it is you're doing. you attach that to it on an unconscious level, and that's where I guess the physiological addiction starts to kick in, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. So now we have an understanding, and you said it always has a negative effect. Well, I mean, people would say, but eating doesn't have a negative effect. You know, you have to eat, and yet there are people who have really serious eating addiction problems, or they behave as if they are addicted somehow to the eating process. So how do you deal with somebody who maybe tends to overeat because for a love of food, knowing that overeating is not healthy? How do you deal with somebody like that?
Well, during the conversation I'd be having with that person, I would be asking them what their thoughts are about their eating habits and what effects they've noticed it's having. Is it having any effects that they would like to change? And
Right.
have they also noticed that it's caused maybe anything that they might consider to be a problem in their life?
Okay, and so give me an example of how that conversation might go.
Okay. So the person, I'll just make this up, obviously. So the person might say, so, I'm really upset. I eat so much. I don't even know why I'm upset about this, but it's just, you know the way society is, they have all these value judgments. I said, okay, well, I agree with you. And, what do you think about your overeating? Like, do you consider it something that you want to discuss with me? Is it something that maybe you'd like to change in some way? And then the person might say, well, I don't know, is it okay if we just talk about it? And I say, sure. And then they say, well, here's part of the problem. I love eating. And I just like, for example, I'll tell you one of the things, donuts. Oh my God. I just can't, let's say, for example, I'm at work and they have a party and there's donuts. I can't walk past the donuts without grabbing at least three or four. I just love them. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, do you notice any difference in how you feel before you eat the donuts and after you eat the donuts? And then the person would say to me, and I've had these experiences, and the
Sure.
person would say to me, it's funny you mentioned that. One of the things I notice is maybe within about an hour, maybe a little bit less after I get real sleepy. I said, would you like to understand why that might be happening to you? And they say, yeah. And I explain how it has an effect on their blood sugar.
Hmm.
And then they say, it's funny we're talking about this in this way. You know, I went clothes shopping the other day and I'm used to wearing a certain size.
Right.
And when I tried that size on, it didn't fit anymore. And, just for a minute or two, like I kind of thought to myself, oh, I wonder why that's happening. Maybe I'm gaining weight. And then I said, well, do you think that's realistically possible? And they would say, yeah. I said, would you like to do something about it? Well, maybe. Like, what are we talking? That's the person saying, what are we talking about here? I said, well, I don't believe in making big changes quickly. What do you think about us having a conversation about how you might start to eat differently and then see how you feel? And the person says to me, I really like that idea. I've talked to other therapists and they just say, stop eating that. And that, when I get out of that session, I go and eat because I'm feeling so nervous. So yeah, let's talk about a plan we could have. Let's see what happens. So that's an example.
Right, right, right. Yeah, no, that sounds really good. I mean, do you ever, one thing that I have experienced for myself, I guess, and you can tell me if this is a common thing or not. I remember I used to drink a fair bit when I was younger, when I was in the military, and I would often drink to the point of just being right out of it. You know what I mean? And I would always, well, first of all, I would physically feel awful the next day. terrible hangovers. And I knew damn well what caused the hangover. You didn't need to tell me that it was anything other than the alcohol. It was my own choice to drink all that alcohol. However, there was another part of me that was feeling there was a sense of guilt. On one hand, I had a desire to be one of the guys. I wanted to be part of that group because all those guys were cool. So I participated in something that I thought was cool. And then afterwards, I would feel awful and feel guilty, which means, I didn't understand this at the time, but now I understand that it means I really didn't want to be cool at all. I just wanted to be part of a group. That's really what it was. It was more about belonging. And so it's interesting to me that guilt and shame are two experiences that come up for me when I think about some of the ways that I showed up in relationship to alcohol. Because often the way, if I would drink too much, then sometimes I would say things to people that I would regret later. I would do things that I would regret later. And it was, people say, yeah, your inhibitions have been reduced because of alcohol. All right, maybe not. I don't know. Doesn't matter. I still am responsible for those choices I made, And so people who eat too much probably go through the same kinds of emotional turmoil for themselves. If I were overweight and I discovered that I was going to try on a piece of clothing that no longer fit me in the size that I was used to, I'd probably feeling some shame as a result of that, saying, yeah, I'm starting to get fat. This is me doing this, not somebody else. What do you say to that?
Well, to answer part of your question, that is not unusual. That's not an unusual experience to have. And I think it's also important and helpful to understand the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is about feeling bad about something that you've done or you haven't done.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Shame is about feeling bad about who you are,
Right.
what you are as a person.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, both of them involve self-judgment. That much is true. And, they're not emotions for that reason. They are the combinations of emotion, sensation, whatever you might feel in your body as a result of this emotion, and also the thoughts that are going on in your head. In fact, in my mind, that's what every feeling is. It's a combination of thought, sensation, and emotion. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. But guilt and shame are usually self-directed. Although I know some people are really good at throwing shame out there.
Yeah.
And of course, it's up to me to catch it or not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was John Bradshaw that talked about, the guilt thrower and the guilt catcher. And might have been somebody else, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, that's really interesting that you say that. But guilt and shame can be powerful motivators too. If we really sit still and look at what we're feeling and say, okay, I'm obviously judging myself here. What can I do about that? What can I do to, let go of that judgment and start to do some healing? That's really, I think, what we're talking about here.
Yes. Yeah. And in a sense, there's two things that can be done that are very, very helpful, or at least they can be helpful. One is to get whatever help a person might need to stop the behavior. And the other is to forgive themselves.
Right.
And a misconception about forgiveness in general is that, let's say if somebody does something and we get upset about it, and if we forgive them, we're making it okay to them that they did that. And that
Right.
really has nothing to do with forgiveness. Forgiveness actually means letting go of the effect and the thought about it, so it's no longer a big part of your life.
Right. That's right. Right. And this is what I was talking about before, that, the whole ego mind thing. The ego mind loves to get even. The ego mind keeps score and wants to keep the score organized such that my tally is higher than yours. I got to be better than you. I got to be right. I got to be correct. That's the ego mind in action. And so, the idea of forgiveness means giving up that scoreboard, giving up any desire for revenge or justice or all that, because all that's doing is keeping you attached to the incident, and that you are now a victim of your own perspective on the incident rather than just being a victim of whatever somebody else did to you.
Yep. Yep. That's exactly it.
Yeah. Well, I
So
think personally, forgiveness is a very, very powerful tool. It's probably one of the most powerful tools we have for personal growth and for healing and all that kind of stuff. And as you say, because of the ego mind's belief that forgiving means giving up, or condoning someone else's behavior,
yeah.
that's not what it means at all. It just means I'm giving up my own attachment to this thing. I am releasing it. I don't even have to think about the other person anymore. And the other person doesn't have to know that I have forgiven him or her. It's completely about me. It's not about anybody else.
Yes. Yep. Having that awareness and allowing that to affect the way that person moves forward is very,
Right,
very helpful.
right, right. And so the healing from addiction has to start with a self-awareness, doesn't it? You have to know that something is not right. Um, so how do you help people become more self-aware?
Well, I basically do that by asking questions to see what their awareness is, and maybe asking questions. Let's say, for example, they say, I don't have any problems in any area of my life. Everything's great. I have a great
Right,
job. I make good money. I'm married. So then I'll ask more specific questions. So I might, for example, say, well, tell me a little bit about what your job is like. Do you work for somebody? Do you have your own job? So let's say a person says, I work for someone. And then as we talk, we start to talk about challenges that person is having on their job. And by having that conversation, I want to see if it's causing a problem on the job. And if it is, I want to help the person to recognize on their own as much as possible that, hey, maybe there is a connection there. Because as you say, once that person has that connection, of course, there might be some defensiveness,
of course.
there might be some rationalization, but that's another reason why I never tell anybody what to do and I never push, but I always let people know either what I think or what might be possible so that they can consider that.
Right. Yeah.
And, there are times that a person that I've been talking with, it's not a problem. I don't even want to talk about it. So what am I going to do? So we don't talk about it. And part of my thought is maybe at some point that person would be willing. But if that person has other things they want to talk about, why not talk about that too and see how helpful I could be in that situation?
Right. It's interesting that this idea that when people are talking about their own lives, it's almost as if I was just walking down the street and I saw this person. Hey, hi, how are you? And the response I get is, oh, hi, great, thanks, how are you? And that's how we interact with each other. I mean, 95% of the time it's bullshit, but we say it anyway because we have to appear happy. We have to appear as if everything is, rosy and so forth. So I like to screw people up. Sometimes I've had people I don't even know, say, hi there, how you doing? And I say, oh, pretty crappy, but thanks for asking. Just to see what they do.
Yeah.
to get some kind of reaction. And sometimes I'll see the head go, flip. And, what? Oh, well, I hope you have a better day or something. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
But that's how we are. We are so, in many ways, caught up in our automatic sleepwalker behavior that we don't even really think about our own lives. And what this also says to me, most of us lie to ourselves about how our lives really are. We try to pretend that everything is all rosy and wonderful and stuff, and maybe it's not. And
Yeah.
the reason that we choose not to say so is because we have another belief. Well, if I tell you that, then I'm going to put some kind of a burden on you, and we're going to get into this weird conversation. You're going to feel obligated to help me, and blah 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 blah. All right, I'm not suggesting that people should necessarily completely open the kimono and tell everything about what's going on in their life to everybody you meet. But at some point, you have to be honest, at least to yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Having the awareness and then having the intention to make a change.
Right,
And then, of course, the third part is knowing how.
right. Well, often I think, well, here's what I believe. I'm a very spiritual person, and I have a belief that the moment I set an intention for something, then the universe kind of brings everything into alignment such that that intention becomes easier for me to create. Just to give you one very, very powerful example from my life, I spent the first many years of my life believing, because my mom had said these words to me when I was only 3 years old, I know you better than you know yourself. I came to the conclusion that everyone knew me better than I knew myself. And in order for me to know what I wanted and needed, I had to defer to them and get the information externally. Now that started when I was 3 years old, and it built and grew and became a really amorphous thing over the course of the next 40 years. And of course, by the time that 40 years was up, I was a really unpleasant, angry, resentful person. Here I had been doing everything that I was told I was supposed to be doing, and nothing was working out. I was not happy. I was miserable. So what did I do? I ended up doing the only thing I thought I could do, which was to run away. I basically left my family. I left. But what I had done in that moment, unknowingly to me, was I had made the commitment to change things so that I could get back to the truth of who I was. All right. Now, this was a deeply spiritual move on my part. And from an outside perspective, it may have looked like a completely dysfunctional response to a situation. But what it did was it put me in touch with all kinds of people, teachers, events, circumstances, you name it, that kind of just showed up and said, oh, you're looking to change your life? Well, here's this. You're looking to do this? Well, look, here's this. And all these things just showed up. And I think the one that was the most powerful for me was when I came into contact with Neil Donald Walsh's book, Conversations with God. That really just blew me wide open, and I started on a very, very serious and dedicated path of personal growth. Now, what happened to my family? Well, I still have good connections with my children. I ended up divorced because that wasn't working for me. But, it's sometimes we have to make radical choices because nothing else seems to be working. And for me, thankfully, the radical choice was something that didn't really cause any major harm to anybody. Nothing that I couldn't fix later.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
could have been a lot worse, believe me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But I think also along that time of your journey, you were paying attention to things that kept you on the path that was most helpful to you.
That's right. That's right. And so when I think of addiction, I think not so much in terms of substance abuse or even behavior preferences. For me, the worst kind of addiction at all is addiction to my ego. That is the one that has the greatest damage, because everything else in my belief system, all of the other negative aspects, I drink because of ego belief. I do drugs because of ego belief. All of these things seem to be related to me. So if I can tame my ego, I'm not saying to destroy it or get rid of it. If I can take my ego and bring unconditional love to it, that makes it possible for me to reduce my dependency on other external things. And much easier now for me to stay connected to my heart and soul. That's my approach to it. And I think maybe that's why it was not really, I mean, it was challenging from a physical perspective to quit drinking, but in the long run, as I think about it now, it really wasn't that hard because I was dedicated to it. You know, I knew that this stuff is harmful for me. It will kill me if I let it, if I take enough of it. So why should I do that to myself? That makes no sense. You know. Anyway, I'm talking a lot here, Alan. I want to give you more space to speak. So please jump in. Tell me what you think.
Wow. I tell you, I enjoy listening to you because basically you may say things a little bit differently than the way I would say them, but what you basically are describing as your life philosophy, that's basically mine.
Right.
And your understanding is basically my understanding too.
Right. Yeah. You know, I'm sure you've read lots of books, and have you followed any of the writings of David Hawkins?
Just for a short period of time.
Yeah, he's a PhD doctor, I believe a psychiatrist originally, who spent many years studying consciousness. And well, I've purchased and read almost all of his books. I don't think I agree with him 100% on what he says, but he's got a lot of great wisdom in there. And um, you know, he talks about the different levels of consciousness, which can be helpful to us to heal just about any kind of problem that we might have, including addiction. And in fact, he talks a lot about 12-step programs that seem to take the concepts of the different levels of consciousness and codify them into these 12 steps. You know, um, have you worked with 12-step programs yourself or supported people in them or anything like that?
Well, I support anything that a person wants to do that can be helpful.
Right.
Part of my training to become a licensed chemical dependency counselor was to attend all kinds of 12-step programs. So that was really very helpful for me because obviously, although my perception of the experience might vary to some degree compared to what somebody else's experience is who attends them, it gave me a really good understanding of what happens in 12-step programs.
Right.
And the other thing that I was able to realize, which I have found to be very helpful for people, is that if I talk to someone about their thoughts about attending a 12-step program, and they say that no, it's not for me, and then they explain the reason they don't want to do it is because they attended a program and it was horrible. And then because of my experience in attending 12-step programs, I was able to let them know that, not all 12-step programs are the same. The program you attended, maybe it wasn't for you. Let's talk a little bit to see maybe it wasn't for you, or maybe you just weren't ready to accept it. But if our conversation helps you to decide, you know what, it just wasn't for me, there are the programs. And when people find the so-called right program for them, they find that it's very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about giving it a try? And sometimes they'll say yes, and sometimes they'll say no. And then if they say no, I say, well, there are other options for you. I
Hmm.
said, there's an option. I don't know if you're familiar with smart. I say this to them. I don't know if you're familiar with smart recovery, but they run that program very differently. The meetings very differently than 12. They talk about
What's
your
it called?
thought.
Smart recovery? Is that it?
Smart recovery. Yeah,
Is that an acronym, or is that just a name they gave
there's
it?
a name, and what they focus on is how people think.
Right.
They don't talk about 12 steps or anything like that. And it's been my experience with some of the people I mentioned that to. Wow, that sounds really interesting. You know what? I'm gonna go to one of those, and it's not unusual for people who just for whatever reason don't want to go to 12 steps. They find it very helpful because, as you said, so much of addiction has to do with the way we think.
Yeah. It's really important what you just said, because I remember when I was trying to quit smoking, that was a whole different kettle of fish. I mean, I was still in my 30s, and well, yeah, approaching my 40s. Um, and I hadn't done any personal growth work or anything like that at that point in my life. And the idea of quitting smoking, it was just so hard. And the only reason that I got motivated to do it was because I had already had a daughter, and I had seen how she had been uh, affected by secondhand smoke that I had had in the house. And then my son was coming, my first son was coming along, and I said, all right, I got to do something. I don't want him to have the same challenges that she does. I mean, I stopped smoking in the house, but I needed to do something else. So I found this program called Smoke Enders.
Hmm.
And I don't know if they're still around or not, but I really liked the way they did it. I think it was an 8-week program. You go from smoking at whatever you smoke to cold turkey at the end of 8 weeks. And I thought, all right, if you can get me off cigarettes permanently, that's going to be great. And the way they did it was, as you say, it had to do with learning how you think about smoking, how you feel about smoking. A big part of their program had to do with journaling. My requirement was every time I had a cigarette, I had to stop whatever I was doing and write down in my journal what I was feeling before the cigarette, what I'm feeling after the cigarette. And so I think the first week we had to change brands. We this was their first switch brands. So now you're used to you're used to smoking these brand, switch over to brand X. Great. Then in the second week, we had to keep smoking brand X, but look for one of the lower, what do they call them?
Lower
Low
nicotine.
nicotine things or whatever. So it was just gradual reduction. And then I think in the third week, we weren't allowed to smoke after dinner. We weren't allowed to smoke in the car. We weren't allowed to smoke while we're talking on the phone. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I didn't understand what they were doing, but now I do. They were disassociating the smoking with the other activity.
Yeah.
And it was really good. So at the end of 6 weeks, I think I'm smoking maybe 4 or 5 cigarettes a day, and they're these really weak cigarettes. And I'm saying, I'm ready. Let's do this. Let's do this cold turkey thing. Well, then we go cold turkey, and oh my God, it was surprisingly hard, especially given all the gentle work up to that. It was only hard because my body just kept craving this horrible poison that I had been putting in for so many years. But the writing and the learning, and I remember one of the exercises we had was on one side of the paper, write down all the reasons you want to quit. And now on the other side of the paper, write all the reasons you want to keep smoking. You can imagine how long my quit list was. It was really long. My continue smoking list was empty, even though I claimed at the time that I enjoyed the feeling of the smoke. I enjoyed, the way it felt to me. The truth is, I couldn't think of one legitimate reason for continuing to smoke. So It was a great program. Like you say, it was not a 12-step program. It was very different, but it worked perfectly for that particular addiction.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there are similar programs available for other kinds of addictive substances, even cocaine or heroin or any of those other things. I mean, some of them are really bad to try and get off of. I know that, but yeah. Anyway, so just thought I'd share that.
Yeah. That's a good example of a program that someone can follow, and also explaining what contributes to it being helpful.
Right. Yeah. I think whoever devised this program really understood the psychology of addiction and understood, well, we don't even have to talk. We don't have to use the word addiction anywhere in our conversation. We can just get people to look at their own behaviors and say, I smoke because I'm stressed, or whatever the reason is that you have a cigarette, whatever that reason is, just write it down and keep track of it.
Yeah.
The irony is, I think I did write down, I smoked because I was feeling stressed, but having a cigarette really didn't reduce the stress at all. It was a false correction,
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think smoking, maybe even just partially for the moment, took your mind off of the stress. And that could
Yeah, maybe.
result in, yeah, and that could
Yeah,
result in you thinking, wow, I'm less stressed.
right. So it's interesting, and I think that you're absolutely right. A 12-step program like AA or whatever the other ones are, Narcotics Anonymous or whatever, you may not be the right program for you, and that's okay. But there are programs that you can find, and one of the ways, Alan, I think that many people can just go to their doctor and say, all right, I want to talk to somebody about such and such. Who do you recommend? And surely their doctor will have a list of resources available.
Yeah.
Or you
That,
could certainly reach out to Alan directly, or to me if you like, and I'll help you get in connection with Alan or anybody else, that there may be somebody in your neighborhood who can really support you.
yeah, that's really true. And the other thing is that someone talking to a medical doctor, there are medications people can take for the substance addictions. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there are so many layers to this. So for example, there's a diagnosis known as obsessive compulsive disorder. If
sure.
a person's behavior is diagnosed as that, there are medications for obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, here's the big problem with that. If a person, in my opinion, if a person takes medication for, let's say the doctor says, oh, they don't say addiction, they say obsessive compulsive disorder. What's driving that behavior? So the medication
Exactly.
is only treating the symptom,
That's right.
and the
Yeah,
symptom can show up in another way,
that's right.
which may not be harmful, but it can be debilitating in certain ways. So, for example,
Right.
one of the examples of obsessive compulsive disorder is when a person leaves their home, they check to make sure the door is locked 7 times, many times. So let's say maybe they never did that, but now they stopped overeating. But now maybe they're going to start doing that because they still have that underlying drive. So also, what's driving that behavior has to be understood and managed. And
Right.
just to kind of throw in one of my personal beliefs, I think it's very rare that medication sometimes even needs to be taken, or that it needs to be taken long term. Because in a certain sense, because it only treats a symptom, usually, it creates a dependency on the medication.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Then you become addicted to a whole new thing,
And the
And
side
let's face
effects.
it. Let's face it. The pharmaceutical industry, uh, loves it when we're sick. They won't ever say that. But the sicker we are, the more money they make. Because they just keep giving a new medication for a different set of symptoms. And don't even get me started.
I know.
But I agree with you 100%. The people have the power to heal themselves if they give themselves permission to do so. And as you say, I think that the starting point is that self-awareness. You have to understand what it is you're doing, and maybe understand the mental and emotional motivators that are making you do that, or they're not making you, but they're contributing to your desire to do that.
And also identifying what you truly want to experience.
Right. Yeah. I mean, let's face it, we all love it. I remember when I had to go into the hospital because I had an infected a strep. What do they call it? A really serious infection in my leg, and they put me on morphine. And I remember, wow, that stuff feels good. You know, so I can admit that I like the feeling I get from that injection of morphine. And I also recognize that if I give myself permission to take morphine on a regular basis, I would easily get addicted to it. So the question is, am I willing to admit that I am capable of becoming addicted to something? And am I willing to have enough self-responsibility to say, thank you for that morphine. It served its purpose in that moment, but I will never take it again.
Yeah.
See, this is something that we all have the power to do that, whether we know it or not.
Yeah. In fact, you remind me of an experience I had. I had several years ago, I had dental surgery, and I hardly ever take, I don't know that I ever took pain medication. And the doctor said, just have it in case you need it. So I figured, okay, I know I'm not going to be tempted. So after one of the procedures, I was in intense pain. It was really, really tough. So I took one. I felt good. I couldn't, like you said, I took it, and it was an opiate, obviously, right? Narcotic. And I said, wow, imagine if I could feel that way all the time, no matter what
Exactly.
happens,
That's
you
right.
know,
Yeah.
And then I said, no, wait a minute. This is serving a purpose now. Let's not go overboard with this.
That's right.
And I took whatever I needed, and then I stopped, and that was that.
Right.
So I could relate to your story about the morphine.
Oh yeah, well, I think also what happens is we build up resistances to certain kinds of medications. Now, I don't know why. I remember I was out skiing. This was back in 2010 or something. No, maybe even earlier than that, 2006, whatever. I was skiing in the Sierra Mountains in California. And I took this weird tumble. I was coming down the hill. I was near the top of the hill, and I hit something. I don't know what it was. And I was airborne and out of control. And I landed on my right shoulder on ice.
Oh,
It didn't cause a dislocation, didn't break any bones, but boy, was I in pain. I was in really bad pain. And the doctor gave me, I think it was Vicodin. I'm not sure. Is that a painkiller?
yes.
Vicodin?
Yeah.
And I remember taking a couple of pills of Vicodin and saying, this doesn't do anything. I feel no pain. I mean, I feel the pain. I don't feel anything else. It seems to amplify the pain. And I thought, have I developed some kind of a resistance to this drug or what? So, I mean, I stopped taking it. I actually found ibuprofen and Advil worked better, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you got to really be aware, as you say, and help yourself to take responsibility for your own actions, your own behavior, your own life. Now, I know, Alan, you have a book that you've talked about, and I mentioned the title at the beginning. What can you please just show us that book and tell us where people can get it?
Sure. It's Back to Living. And on the bottom of the page, it's Road to Recovery. How to get
Yeah.
to recovery. And I can put my website in the chat, so because there's a link in the website that if people are interested in either purchasing the book, I also have an e-learning program that's a more comprehensive aspect of the book.
Okay, great.
So,
So just give me the full link. Put the https:// at the front too, so people can actually click on that link directly in this chat if they want.
okay. Should I put www before the title of the website or just
I don't think you really need that.
okay. Okay, it's in the chat.
Yeah, there you go. And look at that. He's got life mastery in the title of his website. The guy's obviously a soul brother.
and I can tell you the reason that's there.
Oh, I'm sure you can.
Well, it's because I became certified as a dream builder coach and a life mastery consultant with Mary Morrissey.
Okay.
So I don't have a coaching business, but that's where I got the life mastery. At one point, that website was about the coaching business.
Oh, good. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, on this website, you've got both a link to your book that people can purchase if they want to get a hold of that. And you mentioned an
The
e-learning program.
e-learning
What's that
program,
e-learning program called?
action-based recovery.
Oh, okay. Which is what we've been talking about all day today.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let me ask you this then before we're getting close to the top of the hour. How does your action-based recovery differ from some of the other programs that we've been talking about, like 12 step and this smoke enders and various other programs?
Well, there's one primary difference. In the research that I've done, what I have found, or I could say what I have not found, is that most programs focus on abstinence, which is basically either not using a substance or not engaging in a behavior. And there's very little out there in terms of how to manage the effects that that substance or that behavior has had on their life. So, what my program does is it focuses on how people can improve whatever areas of their life that they're not satisfied with and that have been affected by either the substances they were using or the behavior they were engaging in.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, anytime we engage in some kind of dysfunctional behavior or substance abuse or whatever, it's usually to compensate for something that we believe is missing, right? And so we're trying to fill that void with something that we think is going to make us happy or whatever. And I think what you're saying here is there are ways of finding that happiness that don't involve any kind of substance abuse or behavior abuse. You can find that as long as you understand more about who you are. And that's
Yeah.
really what we've been talking about all along here.
Yes. And also by being able to have peace with whatever experiences a person has had, whether it's during their upbringing or during the course of their life, that has contributed to them making a choice that really doesn't serve their best purpose.
Right, right, right. Well, who hasn't made a choice that might have been in disservice to our true nature?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think we've all done it.
Yes. Yep, for sure. It's being
Maybe
human.
Jesus didn't do it, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's
It's hard to say. I mean, most people, I would say, I haven't yet met a human being who doesn't have an ego. I have met some people who have a better mastery of their egos than others do, and are more connected to their heart and soul, and have a more spiritual, I guess, affect. They show up in a more spiritual way, but that doesn't mean they don't have an ego. And as long as we're living in this physical world, trying to navigate our way through all of the challenges that are here in this physical plane, we really do need our ego to help us with that process. And so it makes no sense to try and get rid of the ego. It does make a lot of sense to find a way to love the ego into serenity, which is what I try to do. And sometimes with greater or lesser success on any given day.
Yeah.
As you probably have figured out by now.
Well, in a certain way, what you're also talking about is learning how to manage the ego so it doesn't overly affect us.
Exactly right. Yeah. Wow. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here today, Alan, and I want to just say thank you so much for a wonderfully in-depth conversation. I really appreciate having you here. And before I close us out with my final words, I'd like to know if you have any final suggestions or recommendations that you'd like to share.
Well, one thing I'd like to mention is if anyone wants to learn more about what I do, I also have an account on Instagram, and it's alansimberg.therapy. And I have several posts on there that explain about recovery. And basically, in terms of giving any last minute advice, what I would say is it's really important that we all accept what we are so that I'll say it this way, so that we can have the peace to look at what we are and what we do and what we don't want to have without guilt and shame, but with the intention of wanting to have the best life possible.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. I like that. So thank you, Alan. Thank you for being here. And everyone, remember, recovering from addiction is a profound and transformative experience. It encompasses self-awareness, external support, and as Alan has said, a commitment and dedication to change and your own self-growth. It's a process that expects and demands resilience, honesty, and a willingness to confront the underlying issues that contribute to whatever dependency you might have. So by finding a combination of professional help, support networks, and personal determination, this can help you to embark on a path towards rebuilding your life and rediscovering a sense of purpose and well-being. So thank you all for watching today's program. And remember, you can catch the recordings of this and every other episode on my website at lifemasterytv.com. My friends, I would like to invite you to remember to practice my life mastery mantra every single day. It goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. So until we meet again, my name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. I'll see you next time on Life Mastery TV. Bye-bye.